let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning for our succession planning webinar. My name is Selena Dorme. I am the Senior Manager of Engagement Capacity with the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. I'm also a member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver, which is where I'm joining you from today. But I'd also like to recognize the neighboring nations that also share this territory, which are the Squamish and Musqueam First Nations too as well. As I mentioned, this is a webinar on succession planning, and we're joined today with Robin Henry, independent HR management consultant. He's worked with us quite a bit. If you've ever taken our management training academies on human resources management, you've probably heard from him, as well as some of our other webinars. So big thank you to Robin for joining us this morning to talk about succession planning. His portion is going to be only about I want to say 15 minutes or so. He's got a few slides, and then we can open it up for discussion. So these webinars are meant to be a place to kind of pick the brain of the expert in the room, but also to ask your questions and share information amongst each other too as well. I'm more than happy to share contact information if it's requested and or desired with other folks in the room, so you can continue networking after this webinar is over. It is being recorded, so you probably got a little notification when you joined the session. These webinars are also available on the FNPSS YouTube channel and will be posted either later today or tomorrow, so you can go back and watch it and or share it with anybody else that you think would be interested in the topic. Thank you, Julia, for putting some of that those comments in the chat. So we do have some FNPSS folks behind the scene if you have any technical issues. And of course, you can put your questions in the chat. I'm going to be moderating the session, but it is a fairly small group. So please feel free to just kind of raise your hand and ask your question or put your question in the chat. We can make sure that we address it. I don't think we'll get to a point where we can't answer all of the wonderful questions today. And I think that's about it. Let's go ahead and get started, and I'll hand it over to Robin.
Good day, everyone. I'm joining you from Ottawa, the nation's capital. So nice to see you. Oftentimes we say when people join workshops online, we like to see faces. I like that too, but I'm not going to force you to turn your cameras on, because it's important for me as a facilitator to kind of see that people are engaged or not engaged. Do I need to change my approach, anything like that? So if you don't mind, please turn your cameras on. One of these, the session, as Selena said, is it's a small group compared to some of the other sessions that the FNPS have had. And I think that's a good thing, because it's a smaller group. So I'm going to be able to talk a little more than I had intended to about each of these slides I'm going to go through with you. This is a really brief introduction to succession planning and why it's so important and what you can do to start thinking about what you need to do in preparation to get the ball rolling in that regard. I'm looking for questions. That's why I'm here, is just to introduce the topic to you, but also to respond to any questions you might have as we go through it. So please do not be shy to put up your hand, and we'll take it from there. For those of you who don't know me, Robin Henry, I'm president and founder of Two Eagles HR Consulting, and I do a lot of work with my friends at the First Nations Public Service Secretariat, Selena, Julia, and now I just met Jen today. So I'm really glad to be here. I really support the work that the organization is doing, because that's what it's all about, is building capacity for First Nations communities in BC. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in, and we're going to talk about succession planning. It's a short deck. There's only like 5 slides, so 4 real slides of content. So without further ado, Julia or Selena, could you open the first slide? Next slide. So first things first, what is succession planning? I'm not going to throw questions out at you because we just don't have the time to do it. But if somebody could tell me, just one person tell me, why is succession planning important? We'll start off with that. Hearing from no one.
Feel free to just unmute and shout out your response. I know it is. It's kind of the morning. We're mid-morning. I think everybody should have had their coffee by now.
Yeah, I just had my bowl of chicken noodle soup, so I'm ready to go. It's like shortly after 1 here. Okay, so why is it important? Well, it's always been a really important a function that not enough organizations, and particularly First Nations organizations and Indigenous organizations, have paid enough attention to. That's the first thing. The second thing is that look what's happening in today's environment. Okay, so we have the COVID, we have all the things that are affecting how we work today. The other thing that's taken place because of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, is that it's changed how people work. Right, so we all know about remote work and hybrid work and all those kinds of ideas that are floated around, and lots of organizations are doing that. But what's really happening in terms of succession and attraction and retention is that more and more Canadians are retiring. And I'll give you a really quick example. Statistics Canada, in the past year, 300,000 Canadians retired. Now, in a country of what, 37, 38 million, you may not think that that's a large number, but for comparison purposes, the 300,000 that retired last year is a 30% increase from the same period a year ago, and a 15% increase from the period prior to the beginning of the pandemic. So that means something. That affects attraction and retention in a large, huge way. So what that means is that it's incumbent upon your organizations to take the steps necessary in response to what's happening out there. The other thing that's happening besides the pandemic and retirement is, if you've not heard about the Great Resignation, it's a term that was used, started a couple of years ago, or at least a year and a half ago, and started in the States, where larger and larger numbers of people were leaving their positions for different jobs. So they weren't just checking out of the workforce. What was happening and what is happening nowadays is the environment is such that it's a job seekers, it's weighing heavily in their favor because of so many job vacancies. Job seekers have the ability to pick and choose where they work, and that's what's happening. It's probably affecting some of you. It's affecting lots of organizations that I work with across the country, and it's affecting organizations around the world. So that's a great resignation. People are leaving for what they see as greener pastures, and I'm going to get into that a little bit as we go through the deck. Job seekers market. The other thing is what succession planning is important for. What else? As we demographics, right? As we grow older, and people, our staff members are, some and a lot, especially in First Nations community, are approaching that age where they have to start thinking about retirement. Some are hanging in there for the betterment of the community, and so they're just contributing, but what's happening is we're aging out of the workforce at some point. So that's really important for us to understand, because what's going to happen with all these job vacancies, with people retiring early, with people leaving organizations for new jobs, it's going to have a huge impact on what's happening to you. The last thing that happens, the last reason why succession planning is important is because unexpected events. So if you think about succession planning as a risk management initiative for your organization, I know several organizations where people in important positions, we know at some point they're going to retire, but we do not take any material action to ensure that the position that they occupy, that we're developing a person to eventually take their place. It is not happening enough. And even when it is happening, some organizations, and lots of organizations, have so-called succession plans, but unfortunately, they're not developed or implemented sufficient to facilitate success. And that's really, really unfortunate. So that's really why succession planning is important. I don't read bullets word for word, but and you'll see this first bullet here. It's an ongoing process. And the reason why I underline ongoing process is it's not as simple as sitting with a succession candidate and here's a development plan and you run out the door. And if you have any questions, come see me and let's talk in 6 months or 5 years or whatever it is, that succession plan, the time period it involves. A succession planning is an ongoing process. So underline that. So an ongoing process, ongoing meaning that it's not a one-time event. So it's a process, and that's why that's underlined. So the idea of succession, again, is to identify and develop candidates to fill positions. That's really what it is. Why? So that your organization runs relatively seamlessly, improves effectiveness, and then what's the end goal is strategic goals and objectives. That's what this is all about. It's a community building endeavor as well for First Nations communities in particular. So think of that in those terms. Succession planning is an ongoing process that involves everyone in the organization to some degree. It's not just the manager and the succession plan candidate together and then working through the process. It's an organization-wide commitment. Bullet 2, it's an opportunity. It provides opportunities for building capacity for the organization. Wonderful. We all know that in First Nations communities in particular, that our job, First Nations communities leadership's job, is to build the self-sustainability, build self-sufficiency, all those wonderful things that make communities function well, that succession planning is an opportunity to do just that. So organizations and First Nations who undertake succession planning will find that it's going to make their jobs easier, and it's going to enhance the community for long-term sustainability. Okay, so it's all about capacity building. That's what succession plan is really about. I'm going to get into what filling critical positions mean as we move through my short little deck. And so I'll go to the next one. It's really, really important. This third bullet, go back one slide, the slide, please. It requires a high level of commitment. So when I talk about a process underlined in the first bullet, I say it requires a high level of commitment from you, and I underlined and the organization, like I referenced in my first opening comments. And I underline commitment. That means time, it means resources, it means collaboration, it means cooperation. There's a whole number of things. So it's not just about here's some money to send this candidate to school and eventually they will jump into this position and everyone will be happy. No, it involves people across the organization, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples as we go through. So it's an organization-wide process. That's the takeaway from this. Just let me reference my notes really quickly. The other thing about commitment, it's also commitment to change. So any organization, and I don't care which organization, any organization can do things to improve how they work. One of the things that I've noticed in my experience is that it's really, really important to ensure that we have a workplace culture that is supportive, besides the really foundational stuff like respect and those sorts of things. We need to develop our organizations that are supportive to this notion, not to mention performance management and other things like that. So that part is, I want to talk a little bit about organizational culture. That's it. Next slide, please. I really like this image, and a lot of this stuff you can find on the internet. So, but I'm going to go through this a little bit because we learn by seeing, right? So this is the big picture. So starting And I don't know if my little thing can point to that first bullet at the top, the link strategic and workforce planning decisions. So again, it's not, succession is not one individual saying, oh, I'm gonna take my finance assistant and develop that finance assistant to be my successor. That's not how it works. It's an organizational responsibility. And the reason why that's important is to ensure that the succession plans, whether organizational or individual, align with strategic goals and objectives. So that this is the first thing when you think about succession, organizational wide. And if you follow the arrows, when you talk about analyzing gaps, one of the things when you decide to do succession is you have to do a capacity gap analysis. That means, what do we have here, right? In the first place, who do we have? What kind of positions do we have? Who do we have filling those positions? What are our organizational policies and practices? Do they support this? And that's what the gap analysis is about, is to look at those four pieces and then determine what the organization needs to do in order to develop an effective succession plan, capacity gap analysis. Next step after that is you identify talent pools. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in detail about what that means. But the good thing that I want to talk about today, particularly in First Nations communities, is that there are, we think, small labor pools, but not necessarily that small, because we also have our communities that we can work with to when we talk about succession. So I really think that's an opportunity as well. So identifying talent, and it's self-explanatory. Who do we have? So demographics internally and external to the organization. What skill sets do these people have? What is their potential? What skill sets do they need in order to fill positions in the organization as they become available? That's what identifying talent pools. So once that's done, we select these folks, and there's different things you can do to assess potential successors. We don't have time to get into all of those sorts of tools in this workshop, but it's an assessment process. From that assessment process of these candidate, the pool of candidates that you identify, you select, and then you develop individual succession plans. And so not necessarily succession strategies, but let's talk about plans, okay? Next step, implementation. That's self-explanatory. We start, remember, it's a process, it's an ongoing process. Succession does not, it's not a short-term event. It takes as long as it takes to develop people to occupy positions at the right time with the right skill set, all that wonderful stuff. So implementation, there's a number of things that need to take place in terms of what implementation means. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we monitor, we support, let's add that to that, support, monitor, evaluate, and acknowledge. We can add those words, but I'm going to add those pieces as we go through the rest of the deck. The three little balloons in the middle around succession planning, leadership, commitment. But let's say / organizational commitment is really, really important. Too often we talk about things and we stand up at the podium and we say, yes, we're committed to creating opportunities for our membership and for the staff, but then nothing happens. So we want to see real material support from leadership. That means time and resources. So that's what that means, commitment, leader / organizational commitment, clear program goals. We go into succession, if done incorrectly, it doesn't work. So what we want to do is be clear on exactly what it means. And when we say program goals, what does it mean? Well, it's inclusive. Any succession plan cannot exclude people based on who they are or those sorts of things. So we want to establish clear program goals. Transparency is a really important need for successful succession planning. clear program goals and objectives. Here's what this is all about. Here's what the opportunity is. Here's who we're looking for. Here's what you need to do to participate in this progress. Here's the opportunities for you. So we're gonna develop a program with goals and objectives. And then, of course, we want to ensure employee commitment to learning, because we all know in First Nations communities that we send folks to school. Each First Nation has an education budget through their relationship with ISC, and so they send folks to school based on that budget. What we want to see is more strategic planning from that end, and how they're going to link how dollars are allocated to how can we leverage that to meet some of our organizational needs for succession. So the other thing that happens, and this is where we get into a little bit about the workplace culture, the supportive workplace culture and respective workplace culture, is that employee commitment. And we all know what happens when we send people to school, particularly in First Nations communities, is a lot of them go off to school. We support them for 4 years or 2 years or whatever length of the program they're in, and then they don't come back. And there's many reasons for that, but commitment, we want the employee to commit to staying with the organization after we put them through a succession plan. We have to ensure that the organization is healthy and supportive, so that the employee who's gone through, we've spent all kinds of time and resources on this individual. We want to make sure that the organization is healthy, where that person says, hey, this is the place for me. So there's a big selling point involved there in order to ensure that employees commit to the organization after they, or as they go through the succession plan. Questions? Just shout it out, please. Hearing them, shy bunch.
Any questions? Bueller? No, I'm kidding.
All right, next slide, please. So as the previous slide shows, here's what it is. And I always like little images. So you see the fella walking up the stairs, and that's this person there supporting this person to move through. Think of this, there's the manager and there's the employee with the briefcase, but this is organizational wide again. So it's not just these two. These are the two primary actors in this process. But that's what it's all about, is support this ascension into this new wonderful world of doing more important jobs as you move through your career. So identifying critical positions. What's the criteria? Well, it's self-explanatory. Critical positions, which are what? Band manager. For Indigenous organizations, it's CEO or executive director, whatever you want to call it. Finance folks are really important. So the director of finance, I'm sure Lynn would agree with that one, right, Lynn? So identifying critical positions, what would happen if this position or the person in this position were to what? Win the lottery and leave, or God forbid, fall seriously ill, anything like that. Remember, the environment is such where people are leaving organizations in droves because they're finding greener pastures where other organizations are dangling the carrots in front of them, and lots of people are grabbing onto that carrot and saying, I'm going to leave because these guys, I like the way what they're doing. So we're going to talk about that a bit, but identifying critical positions is the first step. Okay, then we do the gap analysis like I spoke about. So it's the job. Is the job current? So we're going to analyze the job. Is it meeting our needs? And if it's not meeting our needs, what do we need to do to ensure that it does meet our current and future needs? Secondly, we're going to identify our talent pool. Who is that? Well, it's the people employed by the organization, and in First Nations communities, it's the people in the community. So let's make use of our demographics, or what we have. Like in an organization I worked with in BC, there's a band membership, right? And again, we're sending people to school, and we know how well the young kids are doing in elementary school even, and we know how well the people that we fund to go to school are doing with their grades in college or university. And we know people in the organization, or sorry, the community, who are unemployed at any given time. We're going to start working, and we're going to start using that information to identify a pool of potential candidates. And finally, like I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to also do a gap analysis of the organization. Is the organization such that it's going to be supportive and facilitate success for succession? It's extremely, extremely important that our organizations are healthy, like I said in the beginning, and will healthy enough to be able to support success of any given succession plan. Really, really important. So if the organization, for example, doesn't have a robust training and development policy or program, then we need to look at that. If we don't have tools and equipment to support succession, those sorts of things are really important. If we don't have a common understanding in the organization between departments and between people of the importance of succession and the amount of time that they and resources they may need to commit to ensure success, that's going to hinder successful succession planning. So organizational capacity gap analysis is part of this too. So those three, you can go to the bank with those. Number three, identify potential candidates. We talked about it, internal, external. Review KSA's performance histories. That's really easy to do. The HR department has all this information of the internal folks, and externally, it's the demographics that band membership has all that stuff at their fingertips. Okay. And then, of course, creating individual succession plans based on that capacity gap analysis of the potential successor, right? And that could include what? We often think it's just, oh, we'll send this person to school, and once they come out in 2 years or 3 years or whatever it is, then we'll put them to work. No, we have, there's lots of opportunities. There's summer employment programs is a really, really good opportunity. Too often we underuse summer employment programs, and what we do is we end up hiring students and they're not given meaningful work. We want to shift that. We want to expose some of our young folks or people in school to different things that they may not have thought would be of interest to them. When I started out as a summer student working at this provincial First Nations organization, I had no clue about human resources, but I was put into a leadership position of our summer student program and said, hey, this is kind of cool. I get to work with people and get to know people and to kind of, help them along the way a little bit. And then here I am, this kid who just came out of the construction industry. So we want to give people the exposure to the opportunities that are out there. Cross-training is big. So a succession plan for sure. Let's expose people to different environments. Some people, let's use finance as an example. Let's put a finance person, a finance assistant, let's say, or a clerk or something like that. Let's put them in with the HR department for a period of time to job shadow and cross-train to learn how they do things. Let's put the HR person over in health services or community services to expose them to what that particular department does. It sparks interest. So we need to think about that in those terms. individual succession plan. So it's not just go to school and then it's over. Individual succession plans then lead to implementation. Once they're approved, they have to be vetted, hopefully with HR. They certainly have to be approved, not by the manager, but by the, let's say, the department head with input from HR or HR professionals, like Robin Henry from Two Eagles HR Consulting. I'm just kidding. Implementation. Along with the implementation comes that commitment piece that I talked about in the beginning. It's extremely important that the momentum created from developing a succession plan is supported throughout to ensure success. And you see my words here: commitment, oversight, and support. I underline support because that's what's missing. Even in performance management, in many of the organizations I work with, support is not as good as it should be. And that leads to problems when that level of support is not there. And when I mean support, what I mean when I say support is not just from the manager and the manager, it's from the organization. The finance team needs to be able to approve funding for training and development. The department head of community services needs to understand that it's part of their job to support a succession candidate, perhaps from a different department, just to give them exposure to what this department does. We don't do enough of that stuff to give, and I always say young people, but it really doesn't matter the age for succession. We want them younger, of course, but it doesn't matter about that really that much. Oversight's really important. One thing that happens with the implementation part, regularly, formally and informally, this thing, again, at the beginning, I said it's a process. We want communication to happen regularly, formally and informally throughout the process of succession. And I'll leave that one at that. Finally, evaluation and acknowledgement. I underline the important pieces because acknowledgement, we don't do enough of that. We need to be able to have those hard conversations when things aren't going as we want them or they should go, and we kind of avoid those. So we need to commit to acknowledge good performance, which we also don't do enough of. But we also don't do a good enough job of acknowledging poor performance, and that's to our detriment. So I underline that, acknowledge, and of course, what I always say in all my sessions is then you document and you follow up, and you can underline follow up too, because that's equally important. Questions? Wow, okay.
Maybe
Oh,
there's-
question, just a question.
Oh,
Hello?
sure, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Joanne, just a question. Have, in your experience of what's going on in the world right now, I've noticed too, is more people are moving from being an employee to a contractor. And so what we can experience is more people are being contracted than you know, our succession planning is a little different in regards to that look. So just any kind of ideas in regards to how we move forward in our succession planning with that also in mind.
Yeah, it goes back to the organizational culture. So if you have an organization that provides an environment that facilitates success, which in turn, maybe that's the wrong word, not facilitate success, but the environment that everything that you do in order to attract and retain employees builds a trust relationship. Out of that comes commitment. And that's how you get away from those situations where people are going doing contract work. Typically, my experience with contract work, though, is it involves people who've left organizations, and generally, for me, they're to fill short-term needs. So if you're seeing the opposite, it's either the organization wants them to go on contract or the individual wants to go on contract. That's up to the organization to find out. So my response to that question about if you're asking me, how do we get around this trend you're seeing of people leaving employment roles to go on contract roles, that's not a good trend as far as I'm concerned, because again, we're getting into this thing about capacity building. So I don't like, I like to see employees, but it's all based on workplace culture and how we treat our people and how we support them and acknowledge the work that they do and compensate them and give them work that the autonomy to do their jobs. All that, those number of things will increase trust, which will in turn increase retention, and people won't be leaving and maybe coming back on contracts and things like that. I don't know if that helps. Is it Joanne?
Yeah, that did help in regards to just seeing that trend, because it's so important that if we're going to teach our young kids to get into the workforce and move into these employment positions, yeah, you're right, promoting and them to get into these areas would be good.
Oh yeah, and for First Nations communities especially, it's how do we build that interest for the young folks, and succession planning, by the way, should start with the little ones. And I don't mean we're going to hire kids. What I mean is we're gonna promote that awareness. And we're going to start with the young folks. By the way, did you know that you could have a career here for your community, in your community? You're giving back. You know, there's a whole number of ways we can start people thinking about this from a young age, and sooner or later they start thinking, I'm not gonna I live in Ottawa, and let's say I'm from Ganawagi or Akwesasne or something here in Ontario. I'm gonna go to school in Ottawa at Ottawa U, and I'm gonna get a degree, and I'm going to stay in Ottawa. No, if the organization, if the First Nation starts working with me at a younger age than we have been, my thinking, my commitment, my what's that word, is going to be leveraged towards going back home to help my community, and that can happen.
Robin, there's a quick question in the chat from Lynn. Yep. She asks if you have a sample individual succession plan that you'd be willing to share.
Well, not right now, but sure, Lynn, I could share that with you offline. Be happy to do it. And again, succession plans, you know, sometimes we overthink these things. And when I talk about commitment organizational wide, it scares some people, but this is not intended to scare you. Succession planning is easier than we think it is, providing it's done properly. So we shouldn't let the word succession scare us. It's really, really important when we talk about demographics, by the way. And we know that the workforce is aging. Year by year, it's getting older and older. People are retiring later because there's no one to take their place. Some people want to retire, but there's no one to take their place. And that's bad on the organization for not taking action in anticipation of that eventual retirement. Okay. Evaluation, acknowledgement, document, and follow-up. Boom. Next slide. Last but not least, succession planning do's and don'ts. I like to see the big happy face and the thumbs up, right? That's you guys at the end of this this short presentation. You can say this was fantastic. I'm just kidding. Okay. So the do's, let's start with the good stuff. Do, lead. So that's you folks in the room, or if you bring this back to your organization, this is the band manager, or it's a CEO or the ED or whatever the job title is, or HR or whomever the powers might be. Lead succession planning. Don't wait for someone to say, oh, we're going to do this now. Lynn, you're the director of finance at Numgees First Nation. You say to young Jamie Hill, who's the band administrator, for the benefit of the other folks here, we need to start talking about this because I'm going to retire I don't know, in 5 years or 1 year or 2 years or whatever it might be. It's never too early to start thinking about succession. So, but the point of this this slide here, or this bullet, is somebody has to champion this succession plan. Somebody does, and it doesn't have to be the band manager. It could be any of you in this webinar. So champion or sponsor. Sponsor means you're the one who's leading the charge. You're the one who's committing the time and the resources to do it. It doesn't matter. So let's lead. Commitment, again, underlying commitment is the key, time and resources. And that means money, resources primarily. Time means the time to what? To allow people to learn, to give them the opportunities, but it also means that the manager is equally obligated to give of their time and support, and they're going to monitor, and they're going to have those difficult discussions, and they're going to revise, they're going to do all they can to allow this succession plan participant to succeed. That's going to be their job. And so if you want to dig a little deeper into that, the manager is going to be told in no uncertain terms, your job is for this succession plan to succeed. Boom. Okay. Okay. I'm going to give you a couple examples as we go through this. It's like sometimes we all have these HR policy manuals, and we all have finance policies, and we all have governance policies and all this stuff, but too often they sit on the desk, or we sidestep the policy in order to get things done quicker, or to do a favor for someone, or because we don't want to handle some sensitive situations or whatever, we do not commit to getting these things done. So support, courage. What's the motto? What's is it the motto, Selena? Is that the right word?
Motto? Like
Yeah, what's the courage to excel?
Yes, courage to excel is our tagline, I guess you can call it.
Tagline. So courage. It takes courage to step up and do what needs to be done in order to have the succession plans succeed. So it takes courage. It also takes vulnerability for anyone in a leadership positions, let's say a manager, to ask for feedback, because some of us don't want to hear what some people might say of us. We have to be vulnerable enough to ask for feedback from, let's say, the succession plan participant, and then to take it without taking it personally, and then to adjust your own behaviors as a partner in the succession plan to adjust in order to ensure success. So that's what I mean by courage and vulnerability. Courage to make the steps. So let's make a decision. Let's make a choice. That person there is who we think. We've vetted this person. We've gone through a number of assessments. This is our person. We're comfortable. Let's commit to it. Courage, right? Okay. Communicate regularly. I say it in all my webinars or in-person sessions. Communicate regularly, communicate often, formally and informally throughout any process. Okay. And again, it's not just between you and the participant, it's organization-wide as may be required. Let's let people know how we're doing with succession, not just the manager and the participant, but the rest of the organization. Oh, we sent Robin over to community services to job shadow, or to do, I forget, there's another term, there's an extended job shadowing where you learn new skills, all that wonderful stuff. Let's share success stories with how other folks have contributed to the success of this succession plan. Get those words mixed up. Do address issues in a timely manner. We do not, we shy away from those difficult conversations to our own detriment, and we have to stop doing that. My advice always, if there's a sensitive or difficult issue, you tear the Band-Aid off, you discuss, you get it out of the way, it's done. It will create internally, if you're a manager here, it will take a load of weight off your shoulders for resolving those issues, because they do fester and then they do affect you, not only the candidate, but you as well. Address issues in a timely manner. Monitor, evaluate, and acknowledge. Always say that, monitor. What's missing in there is monitor, support, evaluate, and acknowledge. Oh, support's up there already. So monitor, evaluate, and acknowledge. And when you say monitor, you're giving feedback. You're seeing things, you're getting written reports, or you're seeing certain behaviors. You're going to monitor all this stuff. You're also looking for the good stuff. You're keeping a record of how the succession plan is going. You're going to evaluate as you go along. You're going to give feedback, and that, encouragement, positive and negative feedback. You're going to ask for feedback. And again, that's why it takes this bit of courage and vulnerability to accept feedback from maybe the participant or others in the organization who may provide some constructive criticism, right, to you as the succession plan manager. And last but not least, acknowledgement.
Sorry,
Did someone
Robin?
say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to interrupt for a second. We have about 10 minutes left with the hour.
Okay.
So I wanted to definitely provide some opportunity for folks to answer questions. So I'm just flagging the time.
Okay, I'm gonna just run through this last bit then.
Okay.
Don't ever do this. And I say it, this applies for anything, not just succession. Do not follow through on your commitments. You say you're gonna do something, do it. Okay, so walk the talk. Don't not ask for input feedback. Don't forget that piece. It's really important, because some of these folks, they look to you as a leader. There may be a little bit, could be a little bit, maybe scared or shy, or maybe introverts like me, don't want to bring things up because we think it might upset the person. No, ask for feedback. Tell them it's part of the process. It's really important for success. Don't allow inconsistency or bias or knowledge hoarding. And I've seen it happen in several instances of people being identified to take over certain positions. And in one organization, in particular, years and years and years ago, where a person was chosen to succeed the incumbent, and the incumbent wasn't all in on this succession, because they said, oh, well, I'm going to lose my job. So what happened is the job holder withheld information. They treated the succession plan participant, the potential successor, as their flunky, really. So they didn't give them any meaningful work or the support necessary to ensure success. So that's what I mean by don't allow knowledge hoarding, and then not just you, but other people involved in the succession plan. And then don't not hold yourself or others accountable. Really, really important. We do not practice accountability enough. Okay, questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. And just so everyone knows, the slide deck will be shared. We can share it with this group afterwards, so if you want to go back and reference it. And again, this is Robin Henry, Two Eagles HR Consulting. You're more than welcome to reach out to him and ask him any questions and or secure his services if you'd like. We definitely don't own Robin in any way.